welcome to a new edition of our program, Peace Be Upon You. In this edition of our program, we will talk about relationship between international humanitarian law and Islamic jurisprudence. Today we are joined by Dr. Hussam Eddin Allam, lecturer of international humanitarian law. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's always a pleasure.
Sir, can you give us a quick overview of what is law and why it is so important in organizing relationships?
Yes, thank you so much for this very important question. I do think that it's very important at the very beginning of this series of episodes to start with providing our dear viewers with a quick overview or, if you like, laying the foundations for a better understanding of the importance or the significance of law. So in very basic and in very simple terms, law is understood to be a set of rules that are enforceable, and they are meant to regulate and manage the relationship between the parties, whether the parties are individuals in a particular society or even if they are state actors, between states or sovereign states when it comes to the international arena, and this is where the realm of public international law becomes effective.
So, sir, what is international humanitarian law?
This is definitely a very important question, and let me here connect this question with the previous one, and that's with regards to the importance of law in general and the importance of international humanitarian law in particular. The law is important in any social phenomenon, be it, as I said earlier, in a society, or even if we take it to a higher level when it comes to the relations between states. And the importance of the organizing or the regulating law or set of rules or body of laws actually stems from the mere fact that there is always this need for a higher authority that implements the law, and before that, an authority that develops and passes and codifies the law. So ensuring that there is this body of laws that originates and that emanates from a legitimate and sovereign authority is very important in ensuring the organization of relations and making sure that every party knows what rights it enjoys and what obligations it shoulders. So this is why we have different branches when it comes to law in general. And usually, when it comes to the study of law, we divide law into two broad categories. On the one hand, we have public international law and we have private international law. So when we speak of public international law, we essentially mean the set of rules that govern relations between states. This is essentially what public international law is about. On the other hand, we have private international law, which, as a matter of fact, contrary to public international law, it manages and regulates relations between individuals of different nationalities. So this is the essential difference here between public international law and private international law. So in public international law, the state is there as a party enjoying or exhibiting its authority, its sovereignty. Along the time and with development of societies, and especially in view of all the atrocities that humanity has endured because of conflicts, because of war, because of military operations between different parties, there came this need to agree on and to form an international consensus that there are specific rules of law that need to be observed during the times of war, and hence the importance of international humanitarian law, or IHL, which is also known as the law of war and also the law of armed conflict. So what do we mean essentially by international humanitarian law, or IHL? Again, in very simple and in very basic terms, when we speak of international humanitarian law, we refer to the set of rules that become applicable during the time of an armed conflict. And it is essentially, and for humanitarian reasons and concerns, seeks to limit and to minimize the negative, of course, effects of war on mainly people who are not fighting and people who are no longer fighting in the war. So this is why there is this understanding that when it comes to international humanitarian law, we have two broad areas that international humanitarian law is concerned with. On the one hand, it has to do with the protection of the persons who do not or who are no longer taking part in the fighting, and this includes civilians, this includes prisoners of war, this includes medical personnel, this also includes all religious figures that are not involved in the war, or religious personnel, in other words, who are not involved as combatants in the fighting. So on one hand, this is the area that has to do with the protection. Also, we have another broad area that has to do with the restrictions as to the tactics implemented during the fighting. So, for example, when it comes to what is permissible and what is not to be used as arms or as weaponry during the armed conflict. So this is why, for example, it is well known that, for example, the usage of white phosphorus or cluster bombs, the usage of such weapons is internationally prohibited. And this is a result of the understanding of the international humanitarian law.
So, sir, what is the relation between international humanitarian law and Islamic jurisprudence?
Yeah, this is a very important question, especially when we look at the origins or the roots, if you like, of international humanitarian law. In all civilizations and in all faith traditions, there are these rules and principles, as well as maxims that aim to limit the suffering when it comes to, I mean, the humanitarian suffering and the humanitarian cost when it comes to a state of war. So this is why, in very simple terms, we can safely state that the rules of international humanitarian law are rooted in the customs as well as the natural rules that are embedded in every society, every civilization, as well as all the major faith traditions. So, for example, and this is just to provide an example here in the context of our series of episodes, we clearly see how is it the Noble Quran sets a very important foundation that actually needs to be part of the heart and the mind and the collective conscious of all human beings, and that's all human beings are honored and they enjoy a dignity that is inviolable under any circumstances, including a state of war. So, for example, we read in chapter Al-Isra the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُم مِّنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا.
ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في البر والبحر ورزقناهم من الطيبات وفضلناهم على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. And we have certainly honored the children of Adam and carried them on the land and sea, and provided for them of the good things, and preferred them over much of what we have created, with preference.
We indeed have honored all the children of Adam, or all the offspring of Adam. So here, attributing and affording this honor and dignity is ensured to all human beings. So every human being is worthy of this honor, of this dignity, irrespective of whatever circumstances, be it during peacetime or during wartime. A further important verse here in this regard is the verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly tells us in the Noble Quran, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. And that's fight only back against those who fight against you, and do not ever transgress, for indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love the transgressors. So here we are, as a matter of fact, looking into a verse that is beyond the specifications or the limitations of space and time. And this is why even when the commentators of tafsir or the exegesis or the Muslim scholars of tafsir, when they look into this verse, they say that this is a verse that is not subject even to abrogation or supersession, because the very ending of the verse states, Inna Allah la yuhibbul mu'tadin. That's indeed Allah does not love those who transgress or the transgressors. So it is not befitting, and it doesn't make any sense, and it is not conceivable to say that at certain times it is okay to transgress, while at other times it is not allowed, because the wording or the phraseology of the verse here is very clear, and it is one that prohibits any form of transgression or any form of aggression. So we clearly see, for instance, a very important maxim here, and that's the prohibition of targeting civilians, or in broader terms, those who are not involved in the battlefield, or those who are not combatants. So the verse is clear in this regard, as it says, only those fight back against only those who fight you, i.e., it is permissible to defend but not to transgress. Another important fact, it is permissible to fight only against the ones who fight, but those who are not fighting, or those who do not fight, exactly, or those who do not attack you, or who do not carry arms, or who are not combatants, therefore it is completely prohibited to transgress against them or to target them by any means. And this is one of the core principles of international humanitarian law, and that's the principle of distinction, i.e. drawing a clear distinction between combatants, fighters, and civilians. So civilians are not to be targeted any means whatsoever.
Dear viewers, a short break and we'll be back, so stay tuned.
ولقد كرمنا بني آدم وحملناهم في البر والبحر ورزقناهم من الطيبات وفضلناهم على كثير ممن خلقنا تفضيلا.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and we have certainly honored the children of Adam and carried them on the land and sea, and provided for them of the good things, and preferred them over much of what we have created, with preference. There are signs of Allah's honor to man respecting freedom of possession and disposal of wealth, so long as this is within the bounds of a Sharia or Islamic law. It is enjoyed for the common good of all. Respecting freedom of opinion. This is done to avoid forcing anyone to embrace Islam against his own free will, and to give him the opportunity to voice out his opinion through whomsoever he chooses to represent him. In judicial issues and the processes involved, he should be encouraged to do that, while enjoying good and staying away from undesirable acts in a noble way which does not stir unrest nor escalate a problem. And respecting human intellect. This is practiced with the aim of urging the human beings to put their intellect to use to benefit from the universe which has been dispensed to them, in order to strengthen their faith, to make their life conditions comfortable, and to rebuke blind intimidation which is devoid of thought. There are many references in the Holy Quran to intellect, likewise providing evidence and substantiating claims are also mentioned numerous times.
Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam.
Welcome back, dear viewers, and we are still watching our program Peace Be Upon You, and we are still hosting our dear guest, Dr. Hussein Alam, and we are talking about relation between international humanitarian law and Islamic jurisprudence. So, sir, can you go on in your explanation?
Yes, thank you so much again for having me. It was a pleasure being with you here. And yeah, this is definitely a very important theme to cover, especially in light of many development that our international global human family is witnessing because of these conflicts taking place. So this is why it's very important. I do think that it's very important to highlight this nexus or this relationship, if you like, between the rules of international humanitarian law, or IHL, as well as the rules and the principles and the maxims of Islamic jurisprudence.
Sir, is international humanitarian law codified?
Yeah, this is a very important question, and let me elaborate here a number of points. Yes, there is this very dire need to codify the law, and let me state here there is a very important source for the understanding, the implementation, as well as the development of international humanitarian law, or IHL, and that's the 4 Geneva Conventions of the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949, and the subsequent protocols that later came out to supplement and to further develop these 4 Geneva Conventions. So they actually constitute the very foundation of our contemporary understanding of international humanitarian law, and we will look, as a matter of fact, in the upcoming episodes into the content of each and every one of these conventions, as well as the subsequent or the additional, if you like, protocols that later came out in order to cement and further develop these four Geneva Conventions. So there is always this dire need to codify the rules of international humanitarian law, and we also need to here highlight a very important fact, and that's the fact that under the four Geneva Conventions, all states, as a matter of fact, are required to disseminate among the people, all citizens, during all times, during times of peace, during or peace times, as well as during war times, to disseminate and to promote the proper knowledge and understanding of the rules of international humanitarian law, because all citizens are bound by them. So this is one fact. Another very important, relevant fact here in this regard is the fact that also, according to the four conventions of Geneva pertaining to international humanitarian law, all states are required to integrate the rules of these four conventions into their domestic legal systems, so that they can also become part of the legal system or the domestic law of each and every state, so that when there is a clear or an obvious and evident violation or breach of any of the rules and principles of international humanitarian law, the person responsible for such a violation can actually be brought to justice and tried within the domestic and in front of the domestic courts. And not only this, as a matter of fact, we have now international bodies and tribunals that are responsible for the implementation of international humanitarian law. So, for example, we have the International Criminal Court in The Hague, because it has, as a matter of fact, the capacity to prosecute war crimes and those who perpetuated such war crimes. So here we are also talking about a very important notion, and that's the disciplinary measures that can be taken under any laws that governs the military actions and the military tactics of any state. And this, by the way, regardless of whether this armed conflict is an international one or a national one.
So, sir, when do the rules of the international humanitarian law become applicable, and how should the international community act with those who defy the laws?
Yeah, this is definitely a very important question, and I'm sure that this is a question, as a matter of fact, that's on the minds of almost all our dear viewers. So, as we mentioned earlier, international humanitarian law is also known as the law of armed conflict or the law of war. So this is why it clearly follows, as the name indicates, that these set of rules of international humanitarian law, they become applicable and enforceable with the start of a conflict. And once there is a state or a situation of an armed conflict, these rules of international humanitarian law become applicable, and they apply equally to all the parties involved in the conflict, irrespective of who started this battle or this war or this fight.
Yes. So, sir, also is human rights law part of international humanitarian law?
Yeah, this is definitely a very important question also that is always raised when it comes to approaching international humanitarian law or IHL. As it has been mentioned earlier, the international humanitarian law is a set of rules that aim to protect those who do not fight and
Yes.
those who are no longer fighting. And also these rules of international humanitarian law, they aim to restrict the military tactics that can be implemented, especially with regards to the types of arms or weaponry that may be used and that which is prohibited to be used. And this is different, as a matter of fact, in such and in light of this understanding, this, as a matter of fact, stands as a clear distinction between international humanitarian law and human rights law. Because in spite of the fact that they are both very significant bodies of law, but actually they are distinct, and each one of them has developed differently. Because when it comes to human rights law, it is mainly applied during peacetime. And it can, I mean, the rules here, they can actually be suspended during times of war. So this is, as a matter of fact, here in this regard, the essential difference between international humanitarian law and human rights law.
Finally, I'd like to thank you, our dear guest, Dr. Hussam Eddin Allem, Lecturer of International Humanitarian Law. Thank you, sir, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's always a pleasure.
And by that, dear viewers, we come to the end of today's edition of our program, Peace Be Upon You. Thank you for watching.
Assalamualaikum waalaikumsalam.